Okay, greetings all. Purpose of this presentation is to bring to the forefront this subject that speaks on what is called glyphosate. Within the presentation, you would see exactly what is glyphosate and how it is detrimental to the welfare of our physical structure. Glyphosate, a derivative of glycine, is used as a broad-spectrum herbicide discovered in 1971 and subsequently patented by Monsanto chemist John E. France. Today, glyphosate is the most widely used herbicide in agricultural production. So this was the guy, Mr. John E. France, coming out of Monsanto. Most of you would know who is Monsanto and what they do. And he was the guy that invented this herbicide called glyphosate. And glyphosate happens to be one of the most widely used herbicide in agriculture production in the entire world. Yes, even in Trinidad and Tobago. So this article here was taken from Mind Foundation. I came across this article via extensive research that I was doing on the subject, and I noticed, or I saw that this article basically brought out the core issues as it pertains to this toxic herbicide called glyphosate. And the doctor that you are going to look into or read about based on this article, she, I would say, is the prime person or the person that has been spearheading the subject that deals with glyphosate for some time now. So she, being a scientist, has spent sufficient time understanding glyphosate and the negative impacts that glyphosate has on our persons. So this article here will break down her findings and we would see what it entails. Dr. Stephanie Seneff, who is a senior research scientist at MIT, believes glyphosate will go down in history. Now get this, as the worst synthetic chemical this planet has ever faced. As a consequence of its perceived non-toxicity to humans and its massive use in agriculture and on people's lawns. So Dr. Seneff here is saying that based on her research and findings, that glyphosate happens to be the worst synthetic chemical this planet has ever faced. Now folks, this is serious, especially when we go on to see where in our food supply or in some of our foods that this glyphosate is found. And it happens to be one of the most toxic chemicals this world has ever faced based on this doctor's findings. And for the most part, what makes it so dangerous is the fact that, based on what she's saying here, persons are not seeing the issue or seeing the fact that this chemical is very toxic, which leads them to not regulate the chemical as it pertains to it being in our foods. Let's look further. Dr. Seneff sees a strong link between glyphosate and the epidemic of chronic illness that has skyrocketed over the past 2 decades. That includes autism, ADHD, Alzheimer's, dementia, chronic fatigue, cancer, and a long list of autoimmune diseases. Okay, so she has noticed that within the past 2 decades, there has been an increase in some of these same conditions we just read here. So the autisms, the ADHDs, the Alzheimer's, the dementias. These cases had basically skyrocketed within the past 2 decades. And she noticed that it correlated with a increase in glyphosate levels in our foods. So this is what she went on to see. She sees several mechanisms at play here. So the first one here being disruption of an uptake or transport of essential minerals such as copper, zinc, phosphorus, selenium, iron, molybdenum, both through chelating minerals from the plant as well as disrupting uptake of minerals in the human body. So what you notice here is that glyphosate acts as a chelating mechanism, meaning it pulls minerals, important, vital, essential minerals from your body. And not just from your body, it pulls it from the soil itself. In other words, it disrupts the uptake of minerals from the soil to the plant. So it means to say once it's in the soil and we harvest plants from the soil itself, the plants itself would be depleted of minerals. So it would lead to us consuming depleted or minerally depleted foods. Yeah? So she noticed that this happens with glyphosate. Another thing that she noticed in item number 2 here is an impaired sulfate supply to the tissue, which compromises our ability to detoxify. This one is serious. So essentially, this is saying that it deprives or rather disables the body or our bodies from being able to detoxify itself effectively. All right, item number 3, it's saying that it's inhibiting enzyme function, which is responsible for thousands of vital biological functions throughout the body in all organ systems. So many activities in our body requires enzymes for its proper operations. So glyphosate is actually inhibiting the enzymatic reactions in our body, which is very troublesome. And that in itself can lead to many different diseases. Another issue here, it's impacting on mood regulating hormones like dopamine and tryptophan, which are also endocrine disrupting, which is basically having estrogen mimicking properties. So glyphosate in itself is an endocrine disruptor. It directly affects your hormones, your whole hormonal system, the endocrine system. It impacts that system. And many of us would know what happens when you have a hormonal imbalance. For women especially, it leads to fibroids and cysts and these different things. For men, erectile dysfunction, men growing breasts, some of these different things that happens with both men and women as it pertains to a hormonal imbalance. So glyphosate in itself is a hormone disruptor. Another issue here is it's altering the balance between pathogens and beneficial biota in the gut. So the microbiome in our gut, which is responsible for 70% of our immune system, is negatively impacted by the presence of glyphosate. So this issue leads to the proliferation of harmful opportunist infections like Clostridia, Staphylococcus, and Candida. So what happens is that the glyphosate damages or destroys the good bacteria in the gut. And of course, once the good bacteria is destroyed, it leaves opportunity for the bad bacteria to strive or to overpopulate the gut, which would lead to some of these different conditions here like Candida and Staphylococcus and some of these different issues here. Finally, here it is saying that, of course, based on what we just covered, it's damaging the gut microbiome, which weakens the immune system and causes things like brain fog and leaky gut. All right. So what happens essentially is that the surface of the gut, the surface of your intestine is damaged. And the following slides, I would break down exactly what happens when the surface of our intestines, the surface of our gut is compromised. So these are some of the different things that Dr. Sanef identified over the decades as it relates to glyphosate and the negative impact that it has on our bodies. So this illustration here is a cross section of the gut and what happens in the gut itself as it relates to glyphosate. Now this actual illustration here shows you what a healthy gut is supposed to look like. And what you can see on the surface here, this water-like illustration here represents the mucous membrane or the mucous layer in our bodies. So a quick breakdown. Our bodies, so how should I put it? The skin is our first line of defense as it pertains to protecting the body from pathogens. So our skin is our first line of defense. So this is as it pertains to issues in the external environment that we exist in. Our skin itself is our first line of defense as it pertains to the penetration or the access of pathogens. Now, when we consume anything or anything that enters our bodies, more so through our mouths, we have another line of defense called the mucous membrane. And this is essentially what you are seeing here. The mucous membrane is our first line of defense inside our bodies. And the mucous membrane is responsible for protecting the inner part of our bodies from pathogens. So as you would see here in the gut, in the intestine, there is a double layer mucous membrane that protects the body from what goes in to the cells or into the bloodstream. So this layer here, you will see this is the area or the region where the bacteria, the good bacteria, both good and bacteria exist. And this is where the microbiome, the activity of the microbiome happens within the mucous layer. And what the microbiome does, it controls what goes into the bloodstream. So whenever you eat something, it does not enter the body until it passes through the gut. Okay? So the bacteria itself is responsible for bringing the digested food from the gut into the bloodstream. So it controls what goes into the bloodstream. The other illustration here now would show you a comparison between a good microbiome or a good gut versus a bad gut. And in the good gut here on the left side of the illustration, you would also see the surface layer which represents the mucous membrane. And that layer is actually good because the mucous membrane it actually exists, and it is very thick. And you can also see the good bacteria or the microbiome existing there doing its work. Now the opposite side of that, on the next slide, on the right side of the illustration, you would see what happens to be a damaged gut, more so in the sense of a depleted or depraved mucous membrane, where the mucous membrane actually does not exist. Okay, so with this now, the surface of the gut here is exposed now to pathogens being able to enter freely without being controlled by the good bacteria. So what happens is that unwanted pathogens enter the bloodstream through the gut, and that would lead to many different forms of diseases. Some of the diseases that we are familiar with would basically what are called the autoimmune diseases. These are some of the diseases that arise from a damaged gut. Lupus being one of the key ones that happens when the gut itself is damaged. So that will simply show you the step that needs to be taken to remedy someone who's dealing with lupus. So I'll just put that plug there. So what happens, as the illustration here says, opportunist microbes and toxins enter through the gut into the bloodstream because it does not have the protection of the mucous membrane. So based on the subject we are dealing with, glyphosate, what glyphosate does, it damages the mucous membrane in the gut. So reading on, based on the article from the site, but the greatest harm Dr. Senef sees in glyphosate is its ability to insert itself in protein chains as a substitute for glycine, which disrupts the Shikimate pathway, among many other resulting problems. She calls this a slow poisoning, an insidious and accumulative mechanism of toxicity. So what happens here is that glyphosate, over the years, it stays within your protein envelope or your protein structure within your body. And it stays there, especially if the individual is not detoxifying themselves. It stays there over the years. And what happens is that by and by, it slowly releases its toxins from the cells and slowly poisons the body. Now, glyphosate is especially dangerous for children. Childhood autism, ADHD, allergies, asthma, anxiety have all risen at an alarming level in the past 20 years, a time that corresponds to the increased use of glyphosate. So essentially, this is what she noticed, is that within the past 20 years, as we saw the increase of glyphosate, we also saw that correlate to a similar increase to the cases of autism and ADHD, also allergies and asthma and anxiety in children. So there's a clear correlation between the two. As one increase, the other increase. And this, folks, is just one element. You would see many other food toxins, toxins found in foods, that correlate to a similar increase to some of these same conditions. Glyphosate is just one of them. And later or in another presentation, I would also show one other culprit, which would represent or what would be the food coloring in some of these processed foods that also contribute to some of these same conditions. So glyphosate has this negative impact on children. These are some of the foods that are highest in glyphosate levels. Unfortunately, glyphosate is found at high levels in many of the foods that children love, including cereals, crackers, pasta, and bread. So the majority of children are exposed to poisonous and nutrient-depleted food at every meal. Now this is serious. And these are some of the foods that children mostly eat: the cereals, the snacks, some of these juices that has ingredients in it that are very high in glyphosate. These are some of the foods, the things that children eat for the most part. And these foods are very high in glyphosate. So children who are dealing with some of these same conditions, these are some of the things we need to look at. Of course, if the mother is consuming foods that are high in glyphosate, it will end up in the breast milk of a breastfeeding mother. And of course, the child will also get contaminated with the glyphosate. That would cause a negative impact on the child's gut at such a tender age. So let's look at some of the main foods that are very high in glyphosate. So we have corn and soy are the biggest glyphosate users, but chickpeas, wheat, and oats and oat crops are also heavily treated with it as well. So when you look at these food items, these are the high commodities of the world. Any food that you pull off the shelf, it has at least one or two of these items in them. Any food that you pull off the shelf. All right, there's basically corn in everything. There's basically wheat, soy in everything. And then chickpeas and oats. These are two items that most of us consume regularly, especially the oats. I know some person consume oats every day as a breakfast. Yeah, and then there are other foods. There are many foods out there that contain oats. I saw also in my research Nature Valley, the product Nature Valley, which basically has a lot of products. They produce a lot of products that contains oats. Nature Valley is very high, has been tested to be very high in glyphosate. And I know a lot of people consume Nature Valley with the idea that Nature Valley is a healthy snack. Okay, so this is something you must be cognizant of. Some of the other foods that are very high in glyphosate, sugar, for one, canola. Now, canola is something on no level should we be consuming, because canola oil was an oil that was primarily made for motor vehicles. It was not an oil that was primarily made for consumption. God alone knows why this was even given for human beings to consume. Lentils, very high in glyphosate. Now I know that would break a lot of persons' hearts. Potato, another one. Flax. These are some of the main commodities that are very high in glyphosate. And it's so heartbreaking because most of us, even some of us who would have transitioned from an animal-based diet to a plant-based diet, these are some of the go-to foods that we have at our grasp. These are the foods that we go to eat in abundance, to really sustain us. So of course I wouldn't bring all this without bringing a remedy. There must be a remedy for all these things. God wouldn't put us in a position where these things exist and we do not have a remedy to resolve it. There must always be a remedy, no matter what. So the first thing we need to do as intelligent beings, we need to identify the sources of toxins. So basically what we just covered would be identifying the main foods that are very high in glyphosate. Now the foods that I identified here, these are the foods that are highest, that has the highest amount of glyphosate levels in them. But essentially, basically almost everything has some level of glyphosate in it. But these are the foods that has the highest amount of glyphosate. So of course, whilst we may not be able to avoid all the foods, wisdom would tell us that we just need to avoid the foods that are most detrimental, the foods that have the highest amount of toxins in them. So we identify what these foods are, and then the second thing we do is simply avoid them. Okay? We simply avoid these foods as best and as much as we can. Yes, this is easier said than done. But as the wisdom comes, as the knowledge comes, you have the opportunity now to work towards it. And as you work towards it, the idea is that you do good now until you can do better. Okay? So it's progressive. Start where you are at and then work your way where you can do better. The other thing you do is to support your body's natural detoxification ability. Now we did read that glyphosate has something in it that puts the body in a position where it cannot naturally detoxify itself, or it affects your body's innate or natural ability to detoxify itself. But there's a remedy for that. And the remedy here is utilizing herbal supplementation, using the botanicals, the herbs that God give, specifically the ones that cleanse and plunge and purify our bodies. There are specific herbs that are designed to do this for our bodies. That is why the herbs were given for our healing, the herbs were given for our service, they service us. And the herbs were especially given for a time like this, where we are plagued with many toxins. Glyphosate is just but one of them. Herbs are given to really deal with this condition that our bodies are plagued with. So using herbal supplementation, understanding what herbs to use to really cleanse the body of these toxins. Eat organic. The only way you can eat organic is if you plant your own food. This is the only way you can be sure that you are consuming foods that are rid of these toxins. So it goes back to you being able to plant your own food. Again, difficult for some of us to do in this present time, in this time that we are in, but it is not far-fetched. Everyone is in a position where they would have ability or the ability to plant some food. Whether you decide to plant in pots or whether you have land and you can plant in the ground, there is opportunity for you to plant food. And this is the only way you will be sure that the foods that you are eating does not have some of these harmful toxic chemicals. So these are the remedies. As I said before, do the best you could until you can do better. And we need to take care of our health. Our health is essentially in our hands. We have the knowledge, we have received the opportunity to receive the knowledge, and we need to take this knowledge now and apply it to ourselves, apply it to our loved ones, the people that we know, and we could utilize these things to make our situations better. So this is glyphosate.